Dash Radio, Dash Talk Ec. Hope today is going well. Day is going good. Today on the show, Jonathan Weaver, currently Global Football Concepts Director at Nike. Previous life, where we connected up, the world of snowboarding. He was the Burton team manager, I think, for the European team, maybe. And we can talk about it a bit. He's based in Europe at the moment. Seen the high world of elite snowboarding transition across into elite sport, obviously with Nike. And then most latest project is the Anti-Blueprint Project. Just give it a quick read here. The narrative we're fed at school around the common blueprint that's laid out for us seems as such as an outdated model for the society we see ahead of us. This started as a blog, then became a LinkedIn discussion, which led Jonathan to talk to 50 inspiring people who have cultivated themselves in a unique role in the world. And so we can also talk about that as well. Kind of different ways to succeed, different ways to win, different headspace, which leads to different places. So ladies and gentlemen, introducing to the show, Dash Talk, Dash Radio, Jonathan Weaver. What's up, mate?
How you doing?
Where to start? Maybe we'll start here.
Yeah.
You interviewed 50 people.
Yep.
With the goal to try to get a bit of a layer deep behind the scenes of thinking, right? And what is the one thing that stuck out to you the most after interviewing 50 unique, inspiring, aspirational weapons of how they see the world that you would not have thought before? Was there one thing that popped up that you were like, huh?
I think the thing that just kept coming back to me was just whatever you're doing, just get started. Like that was probably the thing that I just kept hearing from a lot of people. Like you can plan all you want, you can write business plans, you can do X, Y, Z, but until you kind of actually put the wheels in motion, you have to learn as you go, because as I say, you can plan all you want, but there is a certain part where it's like, no matter your pursuit, it's just putting pen to paper, making the first podcast, making the first video. And I think that was the thing that stuck out to me, the number of people who were passionate about something and just said, you know what, I don't have the exact plan of what this looks like, but I'm just going to get going. And then we're going to figure out the plan on the way.
Do you think that Kickoff to Go is a self-internal driver that they already have internally to know that they can try, or they know that they will have regret if they don't do something, and because they don't know the North Star of where they're going to get to, or they don't know the roadmap, they in their head just feel, if I just start, then at least I will get more information which can help navigate me if I just do that, take that first step. So yeah, is that kind of the thing? So there's a
I think so. Like
right?
a lot of people are just kind of like, again, just try not to overthink it, because a lot of the people I spoke to, full transparency, come from an action sports background where there is very entrepreneurial drive. And there is just that thing where it's like, I don't know how this thing looks. I know how I'd love it. I know how I'd love it to look. I haven't got a full plan, but I just know that I need to get this thing started. And it was funny because talking to people, that was essentially the same way I was with the book. Like, as you read out the blurb there, I started it just as a blog, which I wrote after my mother passed away, of like things I would tell myself as a teenager because we just had kids, and then put it on LinkedIn, got a ton of people messaging me. And then I just set up Zoom calls with everyone. And I was just like, cool, I'm just going to listen to everyone. And the only thing I connected each person with was, what would you tell your teenage self? Like, used a super simple way in. And then I kind of went from there. And as I say, the thing that kept coming back for a lot of people was just like, just get started on whatever you're doing. Like, don't procrastinate too much, because, you know, there's so many examples. Like, I'm sure if you look back at your first show on here, or your, like, anything you did, like, you know, you use Joe Rogan as an example, right? Like, the other day he reposted his first podcast he did like 12 years ago or something, you know, and the quality, you're like, this is terrible. This guy's never going to make it. And then 1,500 shows later, he's got $100 million deal with Spotify.
But I translate it a little bit to startup world, where a lot of times people that work in a corporate environment that want to do a startup, it's very much reactionary on defense of, oh, I'm going to wait for this funding round. Oh, I'm going to wait for so-and-so to give me a chance. Oh, I'm going to wait to get this raise. Oh, I'm going to wait for blah, blah, blah. And then those hustlers that actually go and create, they're on offense of what is one single small thing I can do today to set me apart from the rest? What is, if everyone else is on defense and going to wait, what is one move I can do? And then if you just keep doing that day and day and day, by day 100, you've got momentum that you've just self-willed and self-created, and now the other person's just waiting for the opportunity. And I've always thought extremely exact the same way of, do not ever have your future dependent on someone to give you the opportunity for something which you could try and create yourself, even if you don't get there, but you create these your own little snowballs and your momentums, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. Sorry, I was just going to say, having worked at Nike, like there is that thing where it's like, well, have all the different bosses signed off on this project you want to get after. Oh, well, you haven't got number 10, you need to get him on board. And by the time you get to number 10, number 1's saying the strategy is wrong. And some people play that game really well. And I think I've struggled at times with that. But what I have loved with the book project is like, you can just get started and like, you can convince numbers 1 through 10 on the journey. You know, you don't have to have it straight planned out at the beginning.
And I think where they feel that gap is they need to wait for someone else to give them that opportunity, opposed to if they create, it's like, well, we're going anyway, so you either get on board with my shit or we're doing it anyway. And what I have definitely noticed in that similar vein is when the other side knows if something's in your head that you are going to go and create and do, the train's already going regardless. And weirdly enough, you actually have more leverage in those situations than if you need them for it, because if you need them, they hold this power of you of like, I will give you the invisible wand of acceptance to take one step forward, opposed to, well, I don't give a shit. I'm here. I'm going to do it anyway. So either get on board or piss off because this shit's happening. I've definitely noticed the more I deal with those that are on defense mode, but when I'm on full offense, the more leverage I actually have, because then they're thinking it flips, and instead of them feeling that they have the invisible wand of acceptance, they then have the invisible fear of missing out, and then they get physical FOMO for what they know is going to happen, and the momentum that builds with it. And it's such a funny thing, because weirdly enough, time and time again with all these things, it's decoding the energy of what's actually happening to build your own energy. And the only difference is, in my head, I'm just saying, no, stuff it, where and go, and I'm going to do one single, what is one single thing I could do right now, regardless who's behind me, opposed to, oh, I need to talk to Steve from accounts to make sure the strategy is okay to hit the P&L. And it's sport, it's elite sport, it's offense versus defense. And weirdly enough, when you see, I'm sure you've seen it, the translation of the action sports mindset to approaching business or their next goals are insanely different to the rest of them, because what their normal is not normal, right? Is that something that you kind of realize as well?
And I would say, and in terms of even the 50 people I spoke to, I had a hard time, honestly, not just talking to action sports people, like people with a background in surf, skate, snow, whatever, because there is that inherent thing that, like, I could probably name you 50 people now who've done amazing things just from action sports background, because you're kind of brought up to have that very entrepreneurial spirit. You understand marketing. It's inbuilt, because, you know, I was a snowboarder. I always say I was a semi-professional. I think I got one check for $1,000, right? So
it counts. It counts. You went pro.
But the thing is, like, free snowboards, like free clothes, you understand the transaction of like, okay, this distribution company in the UK are going to give me this. I then have to show up at a trade show and I have to sing their praises, go for dinner with the dealers and the reps, and it's inbuilt. And across the board, like that action sports mindset of just understanding the exchange of goodwill, services, etc., is just inbuilt. And so I definitely saw that. But then it was also interesting then to see that also, because when you're from action sports, sometimes you can get a little closed-minded, but then to understand that there are people in the fitness world who also go through those same things and they have that same energy. So that was a real eye-opener.
Did you know, when you talk about the anti-blueprint project,
yeah,
the start of that is to go away from what the blueprint is. So in your head,
Yeah.
what do you feel the blueprint is that most people try to follow to hit these successes? What did you envision that path supposed to be that the majority of people would look at?
Yeah. So, and there was a few factors leading into doing a project like this, but one of them was there's a woman I work with. She had a 14-year-old daughter in a school in Portland. So I was living in Oregon, right? Just up the coast from you. You know, she's 14 years old. And I think she was paying $38,000 a year for her daughter's education, right? And so I'm like, okay, she's 14. So next year it's probably the same, the year after. Then maybe she switches high school or something for the last couple of years. Then she goes to college. And my guess is then it's what, $100,000 a year. And I just feel like for kids at that age of 14 or 15, if you feel that you're not at that $40,000 school, I don't want kids to feel that like they've missed the train. And in the US, I find this a lot, that like people are just being like, you know, I'm sure you've got friends there in San Francisco. Well, Johnny's in this school and he goes to soccer club and he's got a coach. And it's like
the alumni effect.
Yeah.
It's the
and to go back to the football example, like look at any of the best soccer players in the world. Like how many of them came from the slums of Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, like kids who grow up playing on, you know, the back streets with a tennis ball. And you compare that to the number of kids who came through an academy system in the US, which is the world's biggest soccer participation. Because they come through such a nice academy system, they don't have any grit or tenacity, which those kids on the street of Brazil and Colombia learn. And so when it comes to an academic standpoint, that's where I was kind of going the same way, because I would hate for my kids to be 15 and think like, oh, I've missed the boat. Because
before you've even started, because you didn't get to Yale primary school or whatever. Yeah.
And so again, there was another example. There was a supremely talented guy I work with at Nike called Gio, and he works on football now. And he would always tell everyone where he went to college, and he went to Bowling Green. And I don't know too much about the US college system, but people would always laugh when he said it. And I was like, why are you laughing? This guy's got a degree. Like, it doesn't matter whether or not it's Harvard, Yale, or Bowling Green.
It does if you're American.
That's the thing, right? And so I suppose I'm super lucky. I went to, and I'll rewind it in just a second, but I went to the cheapest university they had in the UK at the time. And it wasn't a university, it was an institute where you'd study, and then another, like Nottingham, would give you the degree. And so when I go for jobs in the US, people are like, oh, cool, degree. They don't ask anything about the college because they don't know it. And then I'm being judged against people who are being judged themselves on Yale versus Bowling Green. So I was like, that's not really cool. And to rewind it back a little bit, so, and I talk about this in the book, when I was 13 in the UK, we used to have this thing called the 13 plus. And basically everyone would go to the same secondary school from the age of 11 to 13, right? You do your first 2 years, then you do this test. And the good kids would go to a grammar school, right? So the smart kids. And me and there was 4 of us, right? Like super tight. And of course we do the test, the results come back, 3 of them go, and I get stuck at the regular school.
Yeah.
And dude, I remember coming home like,
right? We had that for high school. I think it was like a admittance test. We had to do it to go into high school. Exactly. Everyone takes it before you go, and then it finds out what class you're going to get grouped, and you're like, I'm with the dummies. Shit.
Yeah. And you know, and so like, first of all, you lose your, like, whatever social status you may have as a 13-year-old boy, which is pretty much none anyway, but you may lose your like friend group. And then you're like, oh, cool. So now I'm just in this second-rate education system. Okay, cool. How's that going to work? And so, but then when I look back, that never, like, I guess I use that as a motivation to be like, right, it doesn't matter what I've studied or which class I didn't make. I ended up working at one of the best companies in the world. And I just wanted other kids to know, like, it doesn't matter. Like, even if you're not getting through college, even if you don't finish high school, like plenty of people I spoke to didn't finish either of them.
Well, it's an invisible stamp of worthiness, right? And when it's built in, then like I clearly remember when going into our high school, there was this smart class, dumb class. Yeah. And it was like, it's pretty simple. It was like, oh, smarties, you got over 6 the stuff. You guys, you're the brainy boxes, they'd call them. You're the brainy box group. And then we'd just be like, oh yeah, just doing our own sort of shit. But you're exactly right. But the thing that I have noticed with the American pull of it, and I don't know if it is the alumni effect or what it is, but I remember talking to my auntie over here, and she's a CEO of a big insurance company. There's like 50,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's gnarly.
Yeah, like Nike. Yeah.
And she was just saying, you know, it's so massive that the hierarchy is just absolutely insane, that there are literally thousands of people that look exactly like everyone else. So that alumni effect of, oh, you're one of us. Oh, okay, cool. You can come play, opposed to the millions that aren't. And weirdly enough, the thing that I've noticed differently about in New Zealand anyway was when, and maybe it is over here too, the top leaders or business decision makers or kind of titans of industry, their EQ is so amazing that they can look at anyone and they don't actually see IQ or where you went to school or what you actually did or what you look like, dress like, talk like, act like. They can just see you as an individual. Do I like you? Do I trust you? Do you execute? Do you have the headspace and the intellect to actually get us where we need to go? And what I've seen anyway, that feels like the middle is so stuffed on hierarchy of this invisible stamp of what they think it should be to you be good enough to come play in the cool group. But the actual weapons, they don't give a shit. And it's so weird because it feels like the twos and threes, I call them, in the middle, they're playing the wrong game because then so many of the fours at the bottom of the pyramid they're trying to get up. Like, oh, that's the path I need. Oh, I have to. Boom, boom, boom. Flips directly into the next point, which is then those types of leaders that want that hierarchy and position, they don't make the best decisions that are in the best interest of their business. They make the best decisions which will give them the least amount of risk, not to jeopardize their LinkedIn profile title going one step up on their direction. And it has happened time and time. And it's funny how from a kid with, you know, three of your mates going to the smart class or whatever it is, and then you know, you get held back with like my crew or whatever it was, fast forwards 20, 30 years and it's the same game, right? And I think you've scratched something that's a lot wider than people sort of think. For you, did it feel like you were kind of uncovering a bunch more than wasn't just about action sports athletes, but actually potentially how society judges this invisible stamp of worthiness?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, and there's a few elements to that. So I had a couple of people reach out. Like, so one person was the Dingo. You know, Danny Cassidy's right? So he's actually working on this platform called Find Your Grind, which is like a alternative education platform, which is amazing, the work he's doing. And yeah, he was kind of like, this is what we're seeing with Find Your Grind, that there is a shift where, you know, even larger companies like Google and stuff, now they're able to, they're hiring people and then training them for exactly what they need them for, because they don't really give a shit if you went to Harvard or Yale or whatever else. They want someone who knows how to operate what Google want. So there's a bit of, so there was definitely that. And then I also had a couple of people, I had one guy in the UK reach out to me who's written a couple of books, and he was like, he was saying this same thing of like, yeah, it does feel like there is a wider conversation to be had here. But obviously the thing is, education institutions are, I mean, they're built on this system that you need a certain number of people to go through them every year. And so it's in the interests of every level of education to keep ensuring that kids growing up know that they need to follow this blueprint of go to the right school, go to the right university. I mean, now everyone seems to have to do a master's or like, and then you have to go and work at the right college, at the right company. And there is just this incessant kind of wheel, you know, and I suppose to go all the way full circle from 13 years old upwards, like, you know, there was a girl I was working with, phenomenally smart, and she started working with me a couple of years ago, you know, and she had like, I don't know, $150,000 of student debt, and she was making okay money. I mean, but I was like, these two things don't match up. Like, you're $150,000 in debt and you earn this much money. Like, and so when I talk about that blueprint thing, I'm just like, this can't be the system that's built for kids. That like, you come out the back end of this thing, you maybe have a couple of pieces of paper that say that you can do X and Y, but you have this much debt attached to you. Like,
but it's built on brand, right? That's the whole thing. It's the brand of, and now with so much education being democratized online and everything else, you can always tell what the game is by what products and services those at the top start pushing. And what I've found extremely interesting, especially in this last couple of years, is we're doing a quick pop-up course at Harvard or Stanford or this or that brand. We're going to do an online course with the brand. Then you get your online brand. And I remember a friend of mine went to one of these Harvard sort of, don't get me wrong, amazing, intellectual, crazy, great.
I did one recently. With Harvard.
30G or some shit for 3 weeks.
I didn't do that one, but
like some crazy pop-up gnarly shit. And I'm just sort of sitting there like, well, you're now just paying 50K New Zealand to just have the flex to put a little Harvard badge on your little travel backpack in the Corey Lounge in New Zealand. So everybody like, oh, yo, you must be smart. So it's still educational flexing, right? There's still these stamps
100%.
Flex. Yeah.
And there was one guy I spoke to actually called Oriel Davis Lyons. So he's the creative director at Spotify in New York. Super good guy. And basically the reason I noticed him was on LinkedIn. He had this one post, I'll send it to you, but it was along the lines of, and he studied in New Zealand, and he was like, I went to a night school. You got a brief once a week, or once every 2 weeks, you got a brief. You had one class once every 2 weeks, then you had to just work on your own 12 weeks. And at the end, you put your creative book together. And then at the end of it, you go there was a room above a pub. Someone put some money behind the bar, and then all the creative directors from the local agency came in, and then they would hire people based on that.
That's cool.
And he was like, that was my education. And, he was kind of reaching out on LinkedIn to people, was just like, if the barrier for you is the $40,000 price tag, like reach out to me, we'll get to work on building out your book. And it was cool. So he actually wrote that in, I believe it was June, and it was in the shadow of Black Lives Matter and all the other unfortunate events that happened before that. And so he did this post, got a ton of engagement, and then someone actually reached out to him from the One School, and he set up the One School New York, and it's essentially a creative education platform for young Black creatives. And so he built that, and now he has people enrolled, and he's helping people work through it there. And I think that's the area that I get super interested. The fact that there are people like that who's just like, it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, if you rewind back the optics of what winning is starting to look a lot different now. If you think about entrepreneurship, for example, when I was 11 years old, trying to swap out 2 gig to 4 gig hard drives, and I was trying to just get my little, whatever I was up to. Entrepreneurship was seen as like, what? Like, you're not going to college, or you're dumb. Oh, you're not going to university? Oh, you must be an idiot, whatever it was. Yeah. The rise of Silicon Valley, Mark Zuckerberg wearing a hoodie, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, blah, blah. It's definitely flipped where now everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. Everyone wants to wear a hoodie. Everyone thinks they can got the next, a couple, shit was it like 10 years ago or maybe a bit before, was everyone's got the idea for the next $1 billion app, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
The tide has turned on what the top winning looks like, but it feels still that these outliers that have created their things, they haven't got a blueprint because they've just done their own thing. But when more and more people start doing more and more of their own thing, that almost starts to become not a blueprint of what to do, but a mindset of what they have. And I think there's a difference between here's the map of how to do it, which is the blueprint, which is saying, you go to school, you get the stamp, you do this, you have this, this is your path. But then the winners at the moment, it feels anyway, in modern industry, all sit at the top, but they've had their own path there because there isn't a path, but they all have a mindset. And I think there's fundamentally something interesting around what people see as, this is my map that I have to go to get to that point versus this is my mindset I need to get to that point. Does it make sense?
It does 100%. And I think that's such a good point around having that clarity of where you want to go. But I suppose the other interesting thing that I tried to do in the project as well was also find people who, because as inspirational as a Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk may be, I also kind of wanted to do it for kids who are just like, what, I just want to be happy. Like there's a guy up in Oregon, foster hunting, right? And there's another one called Colin Mooney, and they've both built tree houses, and they're basically building these tree houses up there with the goal of renting them out on Airbnb, and just, you can't get to a point where you have enough revenue to live on, and that's your version of success.
Yeah.
And that's it's funny. I've been going through this recently as well of just like, what does success actually look like? I actually held like a couple of goals workshops the other day, just to challenge people of like, right, what does success look like to you in 5 years? And it's funny how hard people have a time in telling you what that looks like.
Also depending on their age with where they're at, because the energy
for sure,
shift.
yeah.
Your perspective, I'm sure, I've got 2 daughters under 3. You've got, you've got Fano now. It's the tension of, it feels anyway for me, you're in your teens, you're like, stuff the word, I'm going to go get it. You start in your 20s, I'm going to take over everything. And then you get married, wifeys, kids. You're like, wait a second, nothing else matters except this. And then you start thinking about their future. You start thinking, and then you're like, well, is it selfless or selfish? Whose turn is it? And I feel as a father of 2 young daughters now, it's not selfish now. It's been selfless to them. It's like, it's about them. Stuff you, it's them. But exactly your point with what happiness is. I've got a good friend of mine, Mad Dog from Wanaka. He actually used to be the groomer at Snowpark who'd do all the stuff the Burton Opens. He has built his pad. He's got his wood workshop, and his whole gig is, I'm just going to sit here. I've got my handmade concrete oven that makes pizzas, and I've got my little bonfire around it. And if I might just smoke weed, make epic artwork, and just live the flippin' dream in Wanaka, and I am good. And there's something so amazing about that, because it's so clearly defined with what he needs for his happiness, opposed to you chuck him in the city and he'll just absolutely lose his shit. But I think that brings an interesting point of, is it the map of what everyone needs to go to? Is it the headspace of the mindset you need to go for it? But then, most importantly, to your point around goals, is, well, what are you going for? What is the goal? And why?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. So I'm actually in my friend's spare room here. We're next door neighbors. But he works, in the winter, he works shaping the snowboard park in one of the local resorts. And in the summer, he works as a greenskeeper on the local golf course. He loves snowboarding and he loves playing golf.
Cracked that.
And then
he's cracked.
In the times in between, he loves running marathons, drinking beer, and just playing music. And it's funny because I always tell him this. I'm like, that what he has, like a clarity of like, this is what makes me happy, is beautiful, because there are so few people who can ever find that, where they're like, this is the thing I want to do. And as I say, I've been going through this a little bit recently as well, of like, because we set a goal, man, the last 5 years we set a goal of like, we want to live by the beach. And with everything that went on over the last couple of years, so we came to Portugal last year and we ended up buying a house in Portugal. Like, we saw one online, we missed it. And then the realtor calls us. She's like, I've seen a house. And this was in December before the pandemic. And as soon as I see this link, I'm like, oh, if I show my wife this link, we're done. I show it to her and she starts crying. She's like, that's my dream house. We got to buy it. And so I'm like, all right, I guess so we start the thing. We're like, can we get some money? Can we do this? Can we get the loan? And next thing you know, like in February, we bought a house just off the internet in Portugal by the beach.
Never seen it.
Never seen it. No, just some pictures. But so then the funny thing with it, we were then, like the people living there, they stayed, and then the pandemic happened. They stayed through June. Oregon, Portland was kind of shit in the bed. We were like, right, we got to leave. So we jumped on a plane, like literally called Delta on a Saturday, jumped on a plane on a Monday, flew to Portugal. And then when we got there, like a couple of days in, I was like, this is so weird, because this is the goal I've had in my mind for 10 years. And I suppose in your mind, you're always like, oh yeah, when I hit that goal, there's going to be champagne. And
just pop
and
bottles.
I was like, yeah. And I was just like, oh, so this is it, I guess. I was like, this is a goal that I've achieved. And it's an amazing feeling, but it's also then, first of all, you have to like reshift your goals a bit of like, right, where are you going to go from here? But then you also have to, and I'm terrible at this, but you have to just be like, okay, cool, enjoy it. Like, have a little bottle of champagne. Like, not to congratulate yourself, because I think that I don't do a very good job of that, but I was always just like, yeah, okay, get comfortable with it and then set the next goal and off you go.
Yeah. I've had a couple of probably, maybe 3 big wins in my life where I've been like, I still to this day haven't had a friend's family celebratory party for it. I didn't have a blowout. I didn't have it. My brain was already on to the next. And when you're just when you're thinking about, I remember I was 20, maybe 27 or whatever it was, and I started one of New Zealand's first co-working workspaces.
Yeah.
Eventually grew to 10 different locations, blah, blah. And I had the top floor of the 19th floor, looking over the whole city. Corner office had the whole floor, and I was 27. And I remember thinking, this is the top, right? So I've got corner office, top of the whole thing, looking over the entire city, sunset. Well, now what? But for me, that was never that goal. But to your point, when you're sitting there, I just wrote down, when you think, you're like, this is it, with the exclamation mark, like, this is it. And you stop and you're like, this is it? Question mark. And it changes from the exclamation point to the question mark. And then you go, the next one was like, is this it? And then you're like, oh, discovery again, Yeah,
and it's nice to do that as well, because I guess I'd had that goal the last 5 to 10 years. And I suppose in my mind, I was like, man, is this just a thing that's going to be there? And I don't know if I'll ever achieve it. The nice thing is, though, to achieve it, then, as you say, it then sends you back into yourself, like, right, where are we going the next 5 years? And again, once you have kids, you definitely shift your mindset a little bit of like, okay, right, what do they need? What's the best experiences I can bring to them? And how does life have to be constructed for us to do that?
And it's your duty to now. Too. It's like that's on you and your decisions with where you're logistically located, who's around you, who's in their circle, what they see, look, listen, learn, that whole thing. You craft that world which shapes them for that next generation too. It's interesting. I do feel that you've hit something on the head which is greater than the blueprint, because the anti-blueprint isn't necessarily a blueprint, right? It's maybe a bigger question of, well, the blueprint means that you've got a path of where to go, but if you don't know where you're going to start with, the blueprint doesn't matter or is redundant. So you wonder if phase 2 is, not start with why, but, down that path of, if the blueprint says you where you're going, how do you find that contentment which gives you that happiness, like, your buddy there that's living the dream between snow and golfing or whatever. You've cracked something in there, mate.
It's an interesting one. And so I started, so in the book, as well as 50 people, I also wrote 12 chapters, right? And so it's the idea, I wrote it for teenagers. And so in there's one chapter about choosing happiness over money. Because a bunch of people kept saying it. Then, there's one about setting goals, because that's something that most people spoke about. And then I even wrote one chapter just like, here's all the shit you probably were never told about money at school. And it's like, this is how interest rates work. This is how dividends work. This is how all these other things, like, kind of basic. But I was just like, again, like, when you're at school, no one, like, you get some financial education, not much. You don't get much in terms of goal setting. You certainly don't get much about, like, okay, what is important to you? You're just like fed, like, these are the things you need to know. So it's, as you say, I think
there's no real university. There's no,
there isn't. Because, I mean, you look at some of the super smart people who come out of university. I mean, I work with people, and I think money is always the interesting one. They're out buying $1 million houses and they can't even tell you what interest rate they got the house on. And I'm always just like, well,
but they're balling out, dog. They're balling out.
As long as the gravy train keeps going, it. But like the minute the gravy train stops.
Yeah, I know a couple of people who are really, really smart with money stuff, and the way they talk about money, it's used as such an asset. Like it's a weapon. They use it as a weapon. Like, okay, so my game plan is this, my strategy is that, but eventually at the end of the day, I'm going to construct this strategy to take all that money to do this, those things, and they start working in. I guess their approach around it is, you got to be able to speak the language. I was talking to someone about that. The most important thing, you need to be able to speak the language of money, to understand. And it's something that I'm not great. I can understand ideas and concepts, this and that, but you start talking about percentage points, quarters, earnings, all this shit. I'm like, dude, You lost me. But that's probably the point of it, to be able to speak it. I want to then maybe jump on just that quick transition piece.
Yeah.
Before you went with Nike, you're in the world of snowboarding. But you're in the world of snowboarding dealing with young, elite athletes. Young, elite athletes who are focused on, and at that level, they are singularly, purely focused on one thing for their own selves, the betterment of themselves. So you've got, you're talking about before, I think you had maybe 30 people underneath you or that you were looking after it. What was the biggest thing that you saw that every one of these elite athletes were stuffing up with in terms of not their on snow performance, but maybe either with their background logistics or money, finances, friends, party, drugs, booze, whatever it may be? What was the overwhelming thing which you could see from afar, but they couldn't see it yet because they were so caught in it?
Yeah, and I would say this isn't blanket for everyone. Like, there were some super good kids, but just in general, like the money side of things, just, we had athletes who, at Nike, with the money that we were paying athletes at Nike, plus other sponsors as well, up to $500,000 a year, and if you get paid that for, say, 3 or 4 years, knowing what I know now, you would like to think, okay, I can construct a future for myself where I've got a solid base at least. And the number of them who I think came out of that without that solid base, or without, and there's a couple of examples we could talk about where you're just like, how did this happen? But then on the converse, I also saw a lot of examples. One real good friend of mine, he's like tier B in terms of professional snowboarders.
We'll call him John.
Yeah, let's call him John. So John probably earns about 60 grand a year, but he's like, you know what? That gives me the ability that I don't need to work a job. And it also means that I can, every few years, I can save up and I can buy an old home that I can work on in the summer. I can flip and I can sell for some money. And he's going to retire at the age of 40, I guess. And he'll probably never have to work again because he's done this 4 or 5 times. And I look at that and I'm like, man, that is so smart. And he's probably it probably takes him 10 years to earn what one of these other kids may have earned in 1 year. And so I think how to set yourself up financially. And I would lay some of the blame at some of the agents who work in the sport, because, if you've got a person who's earning $500,000 a year and you're not having a conversation with them about, have you bought a house? Have you paid your taxes? Are you saving stuff? Then I kind of feel like it's a bit of a dereliction of duty. And, there's plenty of examples of athletes who were earning crazy money who within 1 or 2 years were bankrupt.
Yep.
And I know
the flood of early 2000s was out of control. The money that was floating around, the early, the Unink crew, all of the big money with the new brands with the Flow guys coming in, when Monster and Rebel came in the mix, when Nike first came on the scene, Oakley was making big pushes. There was a insane gold rush of cash from maybe 2003 to 2008. Felt like it was pretty flippin' gnarly.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say if you look now within snowboarding, I'd say you've probably got 10 people who are, let's call it full-time pros, and they're earning good money, right? Maybe 10 people. And if you go back to that period, we got out of snowboarding at 2014. So I'd kind of say that was the end of a golden era. So all the decade before it, say 2003 onwards, there was probably, I don't know,
100?
Over 100, maybe more. Yeah. I mean, shit, we had 35 on our team, so there must have been more than that.
It always felt like it was an arms race for brands, because there was so much money coming into it as well.
Yeah.
And it felt that everyone was just jumping in the mix and going crazy on their own team, the power teams, and I think True Life and Forum probably had a lot to do with the stamp of what a brand meant around the team, because all of a sudden there was a direct correlation with the team and the video being the dopest, which meant their product must be the best, which meant that that was just the shit. And so then you had the sort of intersection of, as well it felt anyway, then the production companies that were controlling the media getting tied up with brands of, oh no, now you can't film with us, but you can because your sponsor paid the 30K to film and then you can't. And so weirdly enough, it kind of felt like it started sort of manifesting toxicity within its own ranks because of the business model of how the media was getting created, right? It felt, I remember so many conversations of, oh, he can't come on this trip because he's not on Billabong. Oh, he can't be in that. He can't get us there because Burton is sponsoring this film, not that. What responsibility, agents financially, yes, but jumping into the snow side of thing, what responsibility do you think the brands and the media actually had that did good or bad for the sport? Because I think there's a bit of blame on both, right?
Yeah, so I think on the brand side, there was, as you say, I think an arms race is quite an interesting way of terming it, because you had, the two sides, right? One, the editorial content-based athletes who were, and it was like, we need the most stacked team. And we did it at Nike, right? We had Nike Snowboarding, and that was Nicholas, Gigi, Jed, all the dudes, right? But then on the other side, we had the guys, like when the Olympics came out, all of a sudden everyone was like betting that like the Olympics was going to be this golden goose that would transform everyone's fortunes. And so it was like, we need these people. And then and on that side, the thing is, a lot of the people who are then controlling the money with the brands are people who know traditional sports marketing models. So they're not from a snowboarding background. So they're just like, who's the best? And you're like, okay, it's the equivalent of Tiger Woods. Well, we need him now. And I had plenty of those conversations where it's like, okay, I don't care what it takes. We have to sign this person. And you full well know that maybe that athlete doesn't have the pull in the, they don't really have the pull in the core. They are winning some competitions, but if they don't have the personality, they're not going to sell any product. But the person who's making that call, basically their boss, that's what they see as success. They're looking at numbers on a spreadsheet and they're seeing, okay, well, in basketball, we have 82% share of presence in the NBA finals. Like we need in the Olympic finals in snowboarding, we need the same thing. And when you apply that model, you can end up
get pipe jocks, not Danny Casses.
That's the thing. You end up with pipe jocks, not Danny Casses. And then you get into this just like, and you see it now, like, unfortunately, I feel like we're at the back end of a bad experiment in snowboarding where now you've got all these kids learning to snowboard on bags and doing all these crazy flips. You have, apart from Mark McMorris, you have like basically a whole Canadian team of dudes who can do every flip and spin and quad there is. And I don't know even if any of them have got any sponsors, which is, and I think about this as a parent, like the stuff they have to do is crazy. But we've kind of bred this model of the two sides where you're asking kids to win every competition. The only way of doing it is just to train like a jock, unfortunately. But it's not selling product. So it's not helping brands.
And then you go to this point now, for a quick second, as you go, now a influencer that understands clout on Instagram against a Jake Paul or whatever to Conor McGregor can sell 1 million pay-per-views because they sell it, even though the biggest bosses in the world that are ranked 10th through 100 probably don't make anything. Back to the snow point, I remember clearly in, might have been 2004 or 5, maybe it was 5, at Snowpark, the Chinese team came over, and I remember they had hired out the apartments or some shit, and I was like, what's going on here? And they were out at 7:30 in the morning going for a run around the car park with their coaches doing stretches. And we roll up, and I'm like, what is this shit? They're like, oh, they've taken ex-pro gymnasts that are washed up at 13 or 14. They're going to turn them into snowboarders. I'm like, what? And they're stretching. What? And then in 2007, I remember we went down to the gym, and then Kerr Dillon was in there with Daniel Frank or whatever, and they were doing just full like gym gnarly workout, like going hard. And I was like, what is happening? Then there was this whole pipe jock thing came through. Then it was this whole the coaches, and then all of a sudden the energy started changing. Then I remember seeing, like little Kiwi kids with their parents driving them up at 7 o'clock for breakfast up on the hill, and then first thing I'm like, wait a second, this is becoming a thing. Then that split became between, I do comps for my future, or I do basically I'm going to go shoot and create media, or I'm going to go this other way. It felt that probably maybe exactly to your point, Jonathan, is the people on the other side that wanted that result set the entire blueprint for potentially the wrong thing, because now you fast forward 10 years, you've got these kids who can do a back triple flip in 16 whatever it is, and they have a blank snowboard and they maybe get it for wholesale and almost die every single day.
Yeah, and it's funny that as well, because you mentioned the word of influence there, and like I know, so at Burton in Europe they've got Marko Grilic from Slovenia, right? He won Epic Goat, right? He won Aaron Style 2010, I believe, right? And so he's still a phenomenal snowboarder, but he's now a dad with 2 kids, and he's one of the most valuable assets they have, because he is literally inspiring purchase decisions by parents. And
because the kid of him, like him with the Grom, just like shredding, just pumped.
Yeah,
like, shit, Grom.
Dude, and I watch it and I'm like, oh shit, he's got the R2-D2 helmet for his kid. And I'm like, where'd he get it? And it's so funny, because even on the core side of things, right? Like we had it on Nike. It was like, we need the chorist of the Jed Anderson, right? Whoever. Yeah. And, because it is a race of like, you need the most equity you can get. You need the chorist. But then you're like, how many purchasing decisions are they influencing? And
actually, yeah,
that's the interesting thing. And you need a balance across the board, but the ability to have people who can actually really inspire people to go into a shop and go like, oh, I saw this, that's what I want. And I think, and it was funny because I listened to a podcast with Sage the other day, and he was talking about our time working together at Nike. And I would always hammer that into him. I was just like, and it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, right? Like the top versus the middle versus the bottom. And in action sports, I think everywhere, like the dudes at the top, they are there for a reason. And I would put Sage at the top now. And when I started working at Forum, it was JP Walker. I remember the first event I ever went to, JP Walker at the time, like just coming off video part after video part, walks into the room, like shakes everyone by the hand, knows people's names, respectful, having conversations. And it's the same now with Sage, like the most inspiring dude you can meet. And those are the guys at the top. And the issue has always been like the people in the middle who are like, oh, I think I've made it. Yeah. And they're like, oh, well, I get free boards from so-and-so, so I don't need to talk to you. And that was just always my takeaway from like getting to work with those athletes. Like they are on another level athletically, but they also understand what their job is.
The community in the game. Because to your exact point, I'd stopped competing. I got into the media thing, 06 or so, set up the website and all the stuff I did in New Zealand. And I remember in 07, I had stopped competing professionally, and Burton was the first brand to back the website. Guy Alty at the time, and Ruben, who was doing the Burton Open and stuff. And I said, hey, I'm going to do this online thing. It's going to be this media, blah, blah, blah. They're like, all right, cool, yeah, 100%. We need that. They're first to back it, so I always had to back it for that first year. And then the next year, after I stopped riding, I was on Adidas International, Solomon, and West Beach. Those were kind of my 3. I switched to Burton because I had this idea. I wanted to support. How do we create like a team of young bucks to like get good sort of older mentors around them, and so came up with this like Burton rookie team type scenario, and we got a bunch of young bucks, and I helped like coach them and do like big brother type shit, like man, do your thing, and it was kind of a cool thing. So I got on Burton. The next year they went into this whole massive service. So then I basically was an ambassador / media guy or whatever, right? And I was doing my content stuff. I was presenting. I was doing the emceeing. Burton did a nationwide survey of all the retailers and community and everything. I was like, okay, who's the most known athletes that you've known? And I was number 1 of all of it. And I didn't do 100%. A single competition. I didn't do anything. I was like just this dude, right? And exactly to your point, you're talking about those purchasing decisions of Marko Grilic. That's when I super realized, wait a second. And then weirdly enough, I almost got paid more, not even having to throw myself off a cliff. Branding right, and it was Adidas who told me. Adidas re-signed me because I was getting all this TV stuff in New Zealand. And he goes, mate, do you not understand how this shit works? I'm like, dude, I'm not even competing, and you guys are paying me more money. Like, what is happening? They go, dude, we can't buy that opportunity where your logo is because you're in front of the flipping TV and you control it. And I said, so you're going to pay me more money? They're like, 100% yes. And so,
oh, dude,
is a
I know,
riot.
because I was doing the same, right? I was in Europe doing MCing, and I remember I might have ridden a European Open, but I mean, I sucked in the grand scheme of things. And then I don't know what.
$1,000, mate, it counts.
But but then one year I started MCing. I did some stuff for Volcom, whoever else, and then I don't know what year it was, 2008. I hosted European Open, and I love Burton, so I was like, oh, whatever you need. Didn't even think of it. And at the end, I'm just like, okay, how much is the invoice? I'm like, oh, it's like $1,000 a day, and you're like, dude, when you earn $1,000 in your career to go snowboarding, and then someone's like, oh yeah, cool, and that's like an 8-day gig. You're like, oh, okay, cool. I see. And it's funny because I think about it now, and like I look at some of the snowboard films now, and you look at it and you're just like, I don't know how inspirational some of this is, because again, like I'm a parent, whatever else, like I don't know if watching some kid flip 4 times off a jump is that inspiring. Whereas like you look at the people who are doing it right, and they're making people want to go snowboarding. And even back, like in 2005, whatever it was, when like After Lane, Robot Food, those things came out, there was some gnarly tricks in there, but it was more just the fact that you would watch that and be like, I want to go snowboarding, and I want to go with those guys, or I want to create my own crew and do a road trip. And
it was
that's the thing.
Yep, I think you're exactly right. And now even to the point, I was looking on Sports Center, and then it had one of the leading stories was Tiger Woods and his son get 7th in a competition, and you're just watching it, and you got pumped. You're like, yeah, it's not about. And so maybe to loop it back around to the anti-blueprint is the perception of, like a quad cork's maybe cool, but is that the blueprint of what? But what if success is watching your 3-year-old take a shucker turn and get pumped and do a little ollie bump? And what if your buzz is watching, say with Tiger's example, I can almost guarantee you he may have been more pumped watching Young Buck get an eagle on 5 than his own winning the Masters. I'm sure he inside was like, shit, yes. Like, yes, that is
100%.
And so maybe, maybe the perception of success within sport and all the rest of it could actually be doing a full circle where it goes away from maybe performance to pureness of joy, pureness of passion, pureness of thing. Because I think you're exactly right. If you can eventually convert, instead of converting the performance into product to sell for profit, but you go after the purity of it, which actually I'm sure the ties, I think if you fast forward this out another 10 years, maybe if the business model goes the other way, you might be surprised of what the bottom line actually looks like when it turns into commerce, right? Interesting.
Yeah. And you see it, across the board. Like, it's funny. There's one brand in snowboarding, Karua, and they've made turning their thing, right? And so when they first came out, you're like, there's a brand, and they're just focused on turning. But you watch their edits, and it's all beautifully shot, black and white, but it's just turning. And you watch it, and you're like, oh, I'm ready to go turning tomorrow, right? And you can do that with everyone. Like my friend's dad, he comes here for Christmas. He's like 65. We'll watch an edit and then we'll go up and just turn. And I think, to your point, like we'll look back in 10 years and I'm sure the whole landscape will look different, where it's like, it's whatever inspires people to go and take action. And that's where sometimes some of the more mainstream sports are great, because it's like anyone can see Cristiano Ronaldo take a free kick. You can line up outside, with the trash cans and pretend you're Cristiano Ronaldo with your hands on your hips and take a free kick. It's just what inspires people to move and take action. I think that's the main thing,
Well, as humans evolves and change, the trigger points of what lead us to that call to action for action, I think will change. With those things, it's flipping interesting. All right. So if people want to buy the book, see the book, I guess you can't really ship many books right now, but if they would like to see the book or whatever, where can they go to? What can they do?
We can ship books. So we actually have a fulfillment center in Germany. If we didn't do it in England,
there you go.
The whole Brexit thing. So it's theantiblueprintproject.com, or it's on Instagram at the Anti-Blueprint Project. And yeah, just I'd say anyone who's intrigued by it, get in touch, share your stories. I'm more than happy to chat as well.
I do feel that there has to be a follow-up, because if the anti-blueprint has clearly defined that the map to success is not what it was, then the next one has to be, surely, how do you actually navigate the headspace of finding, you know, the purity instead of the potentially the performance or the placement or positioning, right? There's something around the P's there.
Yeah. Right now I'm going through that process in my head of like, what's the next step? Because the easiest thing, like tons of people said, like, when's the next one? You could find another 100 people do it. And I would love to again, because of the conversations it enables you to have. But I think it's the synthesis of what the people are talking about, which is where it becomes interesting. And that's something that I'm probably going to need a few months to work through a little bit and actually, you know, delve a lot deeper into, because I think it warrants that kind of thought process, you know.
And you definitely didn't expect that when you, you know, did a simple blog post and some LinkedIn stuff, and now you've got the book. But then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, it feels like this is some sort of real world thesis I need to try and dissect and decode.
And it's funny that as well. Yeah, it's funny that because I've had people hit me up who've written books and they're like, oh, you should do this. You should think about this. And I'm like, dude, this was just, it started out just as a fun project through the pandemic. And now I'm having to like give it the thought it deserves. I think the thing that I would just encourage anyone to do is like, if there is a, you know, you said it earlier, if there's a scratch that you got to itch, just like get into it, spend the time looking at it. Because the thing that I found personally is, and you've probably found this as well, Robert, is just when you write or you follow a creative passion or you have conversations with people, it just gets you to level up your thinking a little bit and take you out of your day to day. And that's the thing that I love.
I put a mathematical equation there. I put purity times passion is greater than performance times position.
Wow. All right. You might have the intro chapter in the next book then.
Mate, here to help. And just like that, we're done and dusted.
Right. I appreciate it.
I think there's something in there. I really appreciate your time, Jonathan. I know you're a very busy man. Have fun in the pad in Portugal. Stay out of trouble with the lockdown. And I have a funky feeling that we'll be revisiting some of these topics sooner rather than later. Man.
Anytime. It's my absolute pleasure. So fun.
Awesome, brother. Hey, appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon, bro.
Man. Take care. Bye.
Peace. All right, Jonathan Weaver joining us, Dash Radio, Dash Talk X. Appreciate the time, everybody. Very smart man indeed, and pretty awesome, scratching the surface underneath what is purpose and passion for those, and the blueprint of what others perceive as the way to go is clearly not necessarily the exact way to go, because time again, it's proving that there's always more than one way to win, and win wonderfully in the world that we exist in now. Appreciate the A-team. Adios. Have a good one, and I'll talk